One of the most difficult decisions in your high school wrestling career is deciding where to wrestle next. That's why we're here today to make that decision a little bit easier. I'm here with Colt Shorts, D1 wrestler, NCAA Qualifier, two-time PIAA state place winner. He's also a WPIAL champion, Powerade champion, and he just has a lot of knowledge about the sport of wrestling. So today, we're here to break it down on whether you should wrestle D1, D2, D3. Colt is a Caly Poly grad, and I want to know a little bit like what made you choose Caly Poly, and what should guys look for when they're deciding to wrestle at a D1 school?
Yeah, so I think for me, I had to weigh the positives and negatives for all the schools. So I had a list and I kind of just, wrote it all out, and I figured, there's different things that I like about each school. The coaching staff, for one, was big for me. I really wanted to have a good connection with my head coach and the assistant coaches. Looking at different things like the distance from home. Definitely money was kind of a factor. You don't always want that to be like the most outweighing factor, but that was definitely a factor for most things. And so I was looking at schools like Kent State, Maryland, Pitt, Columbia, Naval Academy, even, so like a wide range of schools, and then even some out west like Wyoming, Minnesota. And then Caly Poly came about where I was literally watching the NCAA championships in Philadelphia and saw Boris Novachkov, and I was like, wow, Caly Poly, where was that at? And I kind of looked into it and I saw the area and I'm like, wow, this school's nice. This is really cool. And then I was getting recruited to go to Columbia, and I had a good connection with that coach, and he ended up leaving and a new coach took over, and it was just like a big swing of coaching staffs. But the head coach at Columbia at the time took the job at Caly Poly, and he's like, if you like to come take a visit out to Caly Poly and see what you think, I'd really like to have you on board. And so I went out there, and they took me surfing on my recruiting trip, and that was
Wow.
definitely something I really liked. Yeah, but it was just I figured I could go to a school like, say, Maryland, only a couple hours away, but I'm still not going to be home by my family as much because, you can make a day out of it, a trip home, but with all the things you're doing on a daily basis, like all these meetings that you don't even think about until you're in school and all these things come about.
Right.
Being all the way in California, that was like the one negative about it. But even then, a school a couple hours away, you're not going to be home that much. So,
Right. No, that's a really good point. Is there are a lot of different things that you don't really understand about college until you're in it, and how big of a workload all the classes are, the practices, and all those things, where you may not even be going home that often. Maybe Thanksgiving break if you're lucky, depending on tournaments and everything like that. The other thing that with guys that are going into that maybe want to go into D1 is thinking about what their wrestling like is in high school and how that may transition into college. So one of the things I think that's important is like their training regimen and their mindset. So what was your training regimen like in high school? And then I kind of want to know, like, how did that transition over to college?
Yeah, so high school, we obviously had our everyday practices after school, and then you got your club practices. For me, it was Quest, and those were basically anytime you can go. Maybe it was in the evening after your high school practice if it wasn't that hard of a day, or on the weekends if you're not traveling during in season. But then as far as like lifting goes, it was like 2 to 3 days a week, and I was focusing really on like explosive style lifting, so Olympic style lifts like cleans, hang cleans, power cleans, deadlifts, snatch, all that kind of stuff, because I think that's a really good way to translate your strength into wrestling, because it's not just like building mass like in a public gym. Wasn't really like my scene. I was actually with a bunch of other wrestlers, and we were all we all had the similar goals, and that's what we were focusing on, was just translating our lifts to wrestling, and focusing on explosion and things like that. And we had a really good coach, and I think that's one thing, is when you go into the college room and you're in there lifting with these guys every day, and your strength and conditioning coach he's on it. That's his job. He's getting you guys strong.
Right.
Technique in those lifts are really important, and you'll notice that at those schools they're going to be doing a lot of that stuff, cleans and deadlifts, and that form, getting that early too is big, because there's kids that have never done that before, so they're kind of a little bit behind right off the bat. So it was good. It was a good transition for me. But that's like kind of like the regimen for high school. And I was fortunate enough to be on the Canamac wrestling team, so we were back-to-back state champs, and we had a really good room. So everybody in there was really competitive. Our practice was really hard. Our coaches really pushed us. So like I said, I was fortunate enough to have a really hard practice room every day. So that transition to college, especially Division One, it wasn't as hard as it may have been for other guys that kind of had like the best on their team. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I think some kids like on my team specifically, they were like the best on their team, and their practices in high school were kind of like laid back and was focused maybe just on them instead of really getting after it every single day. So that was a easy transition.
Okay, so yeah, so you have to have that mindset and that train hard every day kind of mentality. I mean, you're going from club practices to lifting to high school practices every day, and that really goes right into D1 because it's a big step up to transition into Division One wrestling. It's the highest tier of wrestling. So the other thing that I want to go into is in college. It's obviously a lot about the wrestling, but the other thing you're there for is school. So I want to know, like, what's the work-life balance? What's the classes, the wrestling like? What is that balance like? Did you have a lot of free time on your hands, or which I'd imagine you didn't, or what's that like?
Yeah, it's definitely learning to balance your priorities. Really getting a good relationship with your academic advisor is one thing too. Like
Yeah.
my academic advisor was great. She helped me with everything. Just writing everything down. I had an agenda basically. I had a calendar and I had everything written out basically to the point where I knew that I have this set of time to eat. Between classes and meetings for group projects or a wrestling team meeting, or depending on the year, if it's a compliance meeting, and there's all these things that pop up. I always used to say, like, there's always something, you know what I mean? Like, you have a free day, but do you really? Because something's always going to pop up. So it's just basically learning to balance all those priorities, and you always have free time. Like it's you got to have some sleepless nights for sure. Studying, you got to stay on top of it because if you start getting behind, you're gonna dig yourself in a hole. But it goes a long way just staying on top of your studies and never getting behind. But, for me, there was always times where guys were like, yeah, you want to go to the beach or you want to do this? And I'd be like, all right, but you might be having to stay up a little bit later and have a little bit of a sleepless night doing your homework. But for me, it was always like, it's crunch time now. I got to get the work done and I'm going to do it. So that was basically that.
Yeah, I think that's really great to hear about what that's all like because from high school to college, I mean, the academics are a step up, the wrestling is a step up, and you really have to get your schedule organized. And that's something I think that guys can work on in high school is, you were obviously scheduled with going to clubs and practices and lifting and everything, and you get even more scheduled and organized going in college, with it, I think is very important. And going into another topic that I want to ask you about is a little bit about your impact on the decision to wrestle D1 and how big an effect money has and how much should it have an effect on other guys who, you may be thinking that I want to wrestle in college, but maybe you don't have all the money to wrestle at some of these schools. How big of an effect should money be in your decision?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be dependent on the family, of course, and how your upbringing is. But for me, I think money was definitely a factor, just because those student loans and that debt kind of definitely it tacks on. So I wanted to try and leave school with as little debt as possible. If I could with zero, that would be ideal. So I think it was a big factor for me, and that brings me to think about just how important the academic side is. So I chose Caly Poly because of how great of a school they are academically. They're comparable with Ivy Leagues, and I was recruited to some Ivy Leagues like Columbia. I was interested in going. I took a visit up there. I really liked it. But the academics is definitely something that you should be focusing on because that's ultimately why you're there. You're there to get your degree. You're there to get your diploma, and just that sheet of paper is so important, and that's why you're there. So, you got to think about you're there for wrestling because that's the sport you've been doing your whole life, most of the time, and that's what you're going to be investing in. But that degree is the most important thing, so that's got to outweigh the sport you're competing in. So, some money was a factor for sure, but there was a lot of other factors going into play for me
Yeah.
for school.
For sure. And yeah, and I think that's really good advice because it will depend on your situation and where you want to go to school, money wise, academics wise, wrestling wise. I think that all has to play a factor in that. So I think that's really good advice. And with D1, I want to know, what are some of the perks you think Division 1 has, or maybe some of the Division 1 schools have over, a couple of these other programs, D2 or D3. And I just want to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a hard transition for guys to realize maybe what division they should be wrestling at. For me, I was like always looking at the Division 1s. That's just kind of where I was. I was setting my goals high, and I knew that once I was being contacted by some, I was like, all right, I'm Division 1 caliber. So
Right.
I was fortunate enough to be looked at and considered for these schools. But yeah, I mean, Division 2 and Division 3. I'm a graduate assistant coach for a Division 3 university, so. I've seen the difference. Most of the time, it's just how strict everything is.
Okay.
With practices and all these different things. Like if you kind of mess up in Division 1, you're already looked at. The coach, he's not going to be putting up with that kind of stuff. So there's a little things like that. But they're all tough divisions. I really just think it's you can be on a Division 1 team and maybe you're not going to start until your senior year, and if that's what you want to do, maybe you'll get rings every year if your team is like the best, like you go to Penn State.
Yeah.
But if you go down to Division 2, Division 3, then maybe you will be the starter and you'll be competing right away, and that's another thing to look at too. So there's pluses for all the divisions.
Absolutely, and that was actually another thing I was going to ask you about is, whether you should look at, am I going to start on the team or not? So I think that's really good advice there. And, why? So what do you think the main factor is maybe that plays into why a guy should choose a D3 school over a D1 school? Is there anything that maybe plays a factor into that, you think?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a little bit of like money too, because Division 1 there are scholarships, there are athletic scholarships. Division 3 there isn't, but there's financial aid packages that help you out for sure. So depending on how highly recruited you are, your package deal might be a little bit different. So that's definitely becomes a factor. But as far as like wrestling goes, and you kind of do in your head know what division you should be at, I believe, and your coaches will help you make that decision too. So
yeah, I think that's good, and it's good to know what recruitment letters you're bringing that are getting sent to you, as opposed to maybe you're reaching out to a different division that may be a step out of your caliber. And like you said earlier, though, like just because you're not starting your freshman year, sophomore year, junior year doesn't mean you're not going to start. Or you could start your senior year, and that's where things should come alive. Whereas D2, you may be starting as soon as you step on the mat. So I think that's interesting to look at. And I just kind of want to close out with, if you have any big recommendations for guys who are really struggling right now they're in high school, they're trying to decide, where do I wrestle in college? Should I wrestle in college? What are your big recommendations?
Yeah, I think definitely just going on as many visits as you can. Looking back, I kind of wish I went on more visits. I mean, it's fun, going on visits and, seeing the school and meeting the guys. I think that's big. Just kind of knowing, that the guys that you'll be teammates with for 4 or 5 years. So just kind of getting that camaraderie right off the bat. And so taking visits, really understanding the coach that you'll be under, because that's a big thing. Your coaching staff is going to be, they're your guardians, they're your guys to go to for basically everything. So that's a really important thing. And also just kind of going back to like the academic side because of how important it is. One tip or advice that I was given when I was making that decision from a real good friend of mine named Jimmy Conroy, he said, you should choose a school that, based on academics alone, you may not be able to get into. So use wrestling to get you into a school that, maybe if it's an Ivy League or Caly Poly even, if I wasn't a wrestler and I went in based on just my GPA, my SAT scores, my ACT scores, would I get in? Maybe not, maybe I would, but if I can use wrestling to help open that door for me and get me in there, you know, and that's definitely something to think about.
And if you guys are interested in learning about other divisions and whether you should wrestle D1, D2, D3, or maybe get into some MMA, make sure you check out this playlist of other videos because we really want to help you make the right college decision. Thanks, Colt, and thanks for watching.